introduce who you are and how we know each other. I'll let you do that.
Well, my name is Benjamin Bryant. I'm many things, jack of trades, master of some, perhaps, but I have known Francis McGrath for 30 years. I think
Almost.
so. I think so. Yeah. I think we met in 95 or 94. So yeah, a little
Yeah.
more than that. And we met at the University of Texas at Austin, and where we were in the same choir. And I could do one thing, but you could do many things. And I was always impressed with that, not the least of which was play the piano and the guitar and show up to fill in when someone else wasn't there and be able to do all of that. And so as someone who has always loved music, but never been blessed with the technical talents of it, I was very impressed with that. And so we've been friends ever since. We kept in touch. You held an annual Oscar party. I don't know if you still do, but you did at the time. And I very famously there were wagers involved, and I very famously and it's a funny and very quick story. I very famously ran the table one year, and the only reason I ran the table is that betting with my friends makes me very uncomfortable. So what I would do is bet 100% of my allocation of my chips every category, because then I would either win or eventually lose, and it would be fine, right? Except I'm too damn good. My predictive talents that year were so exceptional that apparently I ran the table. And I remember it was the year Titanic won, if I
It
recall
was Titanic,
correctly.
yeah. And after
Yeah.
that, we had to put a cap on all the bidding. So, yeah.
But it was not some nefarious devilish strategy. It was completely just like, well, if I lose all my money, then I can just enjoy the party and be opt out of the trash talk. And so from then we've kept in touch. We obviously music, film, many things, and when all of those came together, uh 6 years ago, right around the pandemic, I was sitting at home. I wrote a film that was a very different sort of thing for me. I was in a very weird headspace, as I think we all were after being locked at home for several months during an election year, no less. And and so I was writing this film, and I knew that it was not a stock music situation. It wasn't where you could just go buy stuff that had already been written. And we already connected so much, and you had such vast knowledge of film and music. And I think I reached out to you. I don't remember if I reached out to you about writing a theme song or writing a score that I could use, but it just developed. I think it both gave us something to do and something to think about. And because the film it's very much more like a play. It was very thematically rich because it was the pandemic. It wasn't something where we could use lots of sets or outdoor. There was almost no place. It was shot in Vegas, for the audience that doesn't know, and Vegas closed the week we were around. It absolutely closed. There are casinos that were closed. You lost all of my locations. And so it ends up being set in just two or three places like a play. And so it was very talky, and I knew music to be able to carry and emphasize and add some variety that we had to remove to put it back in. So it wasn't just a play. And, well,
I'm going to push back on you on something you said
uh-huh,
a bit ago, which is
sure.
you are good at many things. I mean, you wrote, directed, produced, edited, promoted, sang, co-wrote songs. I mean, you were involved in every aspect of this movie. That's a lot of different skills. So I'm
Well,
not going to
thank
let you
you.
say that about me without saying that about you.
Okay, I do appreciate that. It is also a Oscar party run the table situation because I couldn't afford to hire someone to do many of those things, so I had to teach myself how to do. For example, editing. I had never edited a long form project before. I taught myself that skill. Never color graded. Some people may watch the film and say that's obvious, but you know what? I'm really, really. That's what I always say. I'd like to see your first full length feature film, and then we can talk. Because I am absolutely proud of every single when you talk about a lot of people dream about things. And this is something I will give both of us credit for. You with your albums, all of which I own, all of which I listen to.
Thank you.
Um, and is that there are a lot of people for whom a dream is too intimidating, or for whom the hill is too steep. And so it's a very easy, and I'm not trashing those people. This is not shade. But you can look at something and just be like, well, I guess I need $1 million and I'll never have $1 million. Or I guess I'll need, I'll have to hire these people. I don't even know anybody who does that. And then there are people for whom the dream is just too insistent. It's just too there. And so you figure out how, whether it's learning technology, whether it's aligning with like-minded people. I am always proud to say that everybody on that film got paid except for me and Tommy. They didn't get paid a lot, but it was very important to me to pay people. I think that, again, I funded it myself, so I didn't owe people money. Because I've seen a lot of that in my time in film and television. A lot of people will say whatever it's needed to get the money to do so. But your film was never going to make back that much money. And so you then go to the next person who writes a check for $50,000. And so, I saved up that money. I paid for it all myself. I paid for the people myself. And I won't say that that film was so insistent. That wasn't the story that I'd been dreaming my whole life to tell. That, if you know me, and you do, that was so. I don't think it surprises anyone who knows me that I could make that film or I could write that film, but I don't think that was the film or the writing or the type of characters that anyone expected to come from me, including me. I watch it sometimes and I go, huh, 2020 was weird, you know, because I just saw people judging each other. And so I just started collecting characters that if someone said, this person's this, or this person does this for a living, or that this person's this, or so and so's child is this, then people would think, okay, I know what that person's like. And then I decided to put them all in a very sort of Robert Altman-esque Linklater. We travel through their world for a while, meeting different people and exploding those things, just to sort of point out that you can be. It's funny. I have strong feelings about whether those characters are sex workers or not, but they do they pedal because they don't interact personally with the clients. But you can work in cam work, or you can be someone who was kicked out of school for an indiscretion. You can be someone, who had to do something because you had personal trauma and this was your best way to survive, and it doesn't define you. You can also be religious. You can also be very sweet. You can also be very business minded. You can also be someone, but I just feel like so many, and I felt in 2020, particularly with the polarization that was happening with the election at the time, and then the fact that we'd all been at home, we were all just flinging accusations and saying, this person's an X, this person's a Y. And I got this weird story out of it. And this is where you came in because, well, I got the weird story and then we have to eliminate these characters because we can't afford to tell that kind of story. And it became this very sort of intimate story about all the people I could fit into this one house. And, and I knew that it just wasn't going to work without the right mood and the right tone. And Vegas is such a great, Vegas has been amused. People who know that went on to see my sitcom know that I also set my sitcom in Vegas. But Vegas is funny. Vegas isn't shadows, it's all these sorts of things. And you have to be very careful both for practical licensing, financial reasons, and for not overdoing it reasons. You can't do a lot on the strip where there's a lot of interesting things happening. But even then, that's a lot of light. Um, People don't realize that each of those casinos owns the area in front of them, and you have to license with the casino to shoot.
I did not know
Yeah.
that. Okay.
No. So the best we could do is drive down the street,
Right.
and we
And
do
that was
do
the
that, and we
opening
do, and we
credits.
do do that twice. We do it in the opening and we do it in the closing. But we couldn't have them just sitting there talking at the Bellagio fountains without clearing that. And I'm not even sure the fountains were on at the time. And so it was an interesting sort of thing. And I kept coming back to the music is what's going to propel us. Now, I never dreamed we'd end up where we ended up. You were so generous and so talented, and also sitting at home and inspired by you had the time, as they say. But I really feel like it makes it. And one thing I've been considering lately is other ways to deliver it. Should I break it up into 15 or 20-minute segments and put it on YouTube, censored, obviously, just to be able to allow people to see it. And it's funny, each thing works like a little one-act play because you did such a great job giving each scene its own personality while keeping it within the larger musical motif. So,
Uh, the one thing that it wasn't just that I was home, I had just retired from my day
oh,
job. And
yes,
so
that's right. Yeah.
this became my first project to do. And so it was a nice thing to transition into. So, but the thing that I took away most, and one of the things I wanted to talk to you specifically about, was we were working fast. We were on a schedule. We needed to get this done. All
Yeah.
post production in a film is fast. I know that. And uh, you were editing and threw me a scene, and I had to
Right.
spit something out as fast as I could. And that has turned out to be one of the greatest gifts because when I sit down to write something, and I think this is in any art form, but you have infinite possibility in front of you. You could do it this way, do it that way, do it that way. And you can get into analysis paralysis really quick. And because we were moving so fast, I developed a habit of I'm just going to throw my first instinct at the wall, see if it sticks. And by doing that, you've now narrowed down from infinity to binary. Is this working or not? Okay, what's not working about it? And you get something to react to. Um, and my memory is most of the time, you were like, wow, that's perfect, or wow, I didn't see that coming.
I think we're
But my
thinking of the same
favorites
thing.
was I remember twice where you were like, no.
That ain't it.
Do
I
you remember the two
specifically,
times I'm talking about?
I specifically remember one, and I'm curious about the other. So the one was Jordan's overdose.
Yes.
I remember that you sent it, and there were these gorgeous, like angels, and it was just it was a fantastic tribute and score for a different character in a different experience. And so, but to be fair, what we did was so that anybody who's watching this knows too, is it allowed us to have a conversation about, okay, we've been editing the scenes because as for those who aren't familiar, you don't always edit the scenes. Here's the first scene, here's the second. Some are more complicated to edit. Some require, I need to get them to the composer sooner because they're going to need more work. And so you haven't seen the whole film. You may have
Right.
read the script, but I also do a lot of rewriting in real time. So there was not a complete script until the movie was produced, and I was like, oh, that's the movie, and then I didn't edit the scripts. Um, and so it was a wonderful chance to then sit there and say, that's not this guy, and that's not what's happening here. What was the
What
other
I
one?
had done was
Oh,
my image was like a lone violin, like this is the soul of an individual passing away from us.
yeah.
And you were like, no. And
He has no
it turned
soul.
out to be my favorite, one of my favorite scenes in the
Mhm.
movie
Oh
because
yeah.
it's a crisis moment and you captured just about every reaction a human being has in a crisis. You got some guy in the back going, oh shit, oh shit. You got uh, the close person who's freaking out. You've got the
hmm
ex-marine taking charge, and then our hero is just paralyzed with fear.
For the first time.
And
So the first time
for
he's
the
had an
first time, he
opinion on
has nothing to
what
say,
everybody
right?
should do. He's been thinking of what we should do, and he is realizing. And you're right. And then you have bystanders, which is always the sort of thing. People who are characters who aren't central who come running in, and it's not really helping because they're like, "Stop, wake them up." My favorite is because all of that was there. How do we not? How do we capture and enhance and complement that with the music,
And
and
it
not
ended
and
up
not
being
compete with it?
chaos.
Right.
I
Right.
had to make chaos out of music, and it was fun.
And then we used a helicopter. My contribution was a helicopter sound that that also had to not compete with your work, uh, because there was that ceiling fan,
Right.
and the
And
heart
I
and
had
the
a
heart. Yeah,
snare drum in
yeah.
there for like
You
the
did,
military
you
feel,
did.
and we had the heartbeat. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
chaos.
and
Uh,
it's the one I listen to the most. So yeah,
oh,
yeah. It is the piece of the score that I listen to the most.
the other one was the love theme
Yeah.
that you said that's too nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Because these people were not, they met that day. Francis, they met an hour.
Right, right.
before. They are indeed the love story on a relative scale, but we
But this
needed
was
it to
a
be,
physical scene,
yeah,
not a
yeah. But
emotional scene.
my, but this is where I really want to, compliment you. And it's the thing that people spontaneously notice. So the film is so interesting because I mentioned this to my dad the other day. I said, I swear only maybe 600, 700,000 people have seen it, but they really like it and they watch it over and over again. And they write me about how, um, how a specific character spoke to them. Casey with his background with abusive family, and Jordan and Taylor with the drugs, and all these sorts of things. Because I'm writing about people, they're heightened versions, but that's melodrama. They're heightened versions of things, but everybody knows what it's like to feel judged or ostracized, or especially, it's funny. This is a bit of a tangent, but I've never thought of it as an LGBTQ film. It's a little bit strange. Like my aunt writes very successful, what you would call beach books or chick lit. And she being a black and Chinese person like I am, she writes diverse. It's like, think like Sex and the City kind of thing. There's like four friends and they're different races, and the main character is often black or mixed. And it always gets put in the African American literature section of your local bookstore. And so I've never necessarily thought of this as an LGBTQ film because if you think about it, it's not a coming out story, or there's not a big revelation about that. The people just are, and they represent a lot of different things. But I
Well,
get the argument that it is.
well, what you're talking
Mhm.
about was the plot of that movie, American Fiction. They were making that
Yes.
exact
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And it's a very strange sort of thing. But because of that, and so the reason I even mention it is I was very resistant to all these people would be like, oh, Amazon promoted. It's on Amazon Prime for those of you who would like to know what we're talking about. It's called Station to Station. Has a picture of the star David Eggers in sunglasses. Uh,
And the
but
soundtrack is on
yeah,
all streaming platforms.
and fantastic. And I definitely hope we talk about the songs as well as the score. But the thing that I've come to realize by the people who will reach out to me and to some of the actors and talk about how much something there spoke to their experience or they saw themselves. Because what I'm seeing is a universal story that for one character that anybody can relate to, but they just happen to be that character might be gay or bisexual or pansexual or or straight, a woman though, a woman of color, whatever, someone who has not seen themselves depicted or has seen a million stories like that, but they've not seen with someone who represents them. And so I've come to respect that, something I've always known, but I really respect it in a different way now, that you receive art and you can't decide how someone else receives art. You just put it out there and allow them to do so. And so I just listen with pride. The only criticisms that people say to my face is I often hear from people who work actual cam work or who are strippers or something, and will say to me, "You got this part wrong," and I'll say, "You're correct. I did not do any deep research on that, and I apologize. Perhaps I should have
Any
had
movie
a
about
consultant."
any profession is going to get it
Mhm.
wrong. I mean,
Right,
if
and
you
there's
know
only so
too much
much you
about
can
it,
do, right? And there's only so much you can do. Though they always like the line, "The customers are very nice and very specific." They're like, that part is true. I feel that in my soul. And so, but I also think Vegas was the perfect setting for that. And so, where I was saying a little bit earlier, uh, is that your viewers are getting introduced to my circular referential style of conversations, is that Vegas is very sunny. And so you don't get a lot of layers there. We weren't able to have a tremendous number of layers in the settings because we basically had only indoor places. And in fact, the law was so specific that you couldn't have more than five people in a room at any one time. That's how
oh,
Vegas was
right.
handling it at the time. Yeah. And so if it was a professional setting, you could not have more than five people in the room. And so, we lost our nightclub, and instead we had to use part of a suite would that just happen to have a bench seating area for the nightclub. There's so many things we would have done differently, but this is what we had to do. And so the music was something that we used as a way to really help define and differentiate the characters, to differentiate the scenes, uh, because the actors were doing their part. we were doing as much as we could, but we didn't have even what was in the original script. This would be at night. This would be at dawn. This would be at a nightclub. This would be walking down the strip, whatever. All of that was contest. My best example of that is there is a scene that was meant to start in the casino, and we had permission for this. It was meant to start in the casino floor, continue on in the elevator, then and walk into the suite. One of the characters would take a shower while the other guy's talking to him in the other room, and then they would finish it up in the living room of the suite right before the other people arrived. This is the Tanya and Taylor scene, and
Yeah,
the and
I figured
the
that's what.
the Tom scene beforehand. Well, now all of it takes place in that one suite. So I did get a bigger suite, but now it starts with him talking to him in the shower and then having the longest conversation, a 20-minute conversation known to man. Not really, I think it was more like 15, but the entire conversation would have happened in motion on the floor, in the elevator going up, in the shower, or in the shower while the other guy's sitting on the bed talking to him from the other room, and then finishing up in that room. Now all takes place in that room. And then the Tanya conversation by necessity has to take place in that room because we couldn't have them in the kitchen baking cookies or something. And so baking
Right.
lemon bread or whatever her specialty was. Maybe I should have. Um, she did a Tama tutorial on how to make her lemon bread. And, uh, and so I did have a rule that we had to have, and this also affected the music too. We had to have someone fight a major revelation or a sex scene every 15 minutes
I didn't
because
know that.
I was aware
That's
of how
interesting.
talky it had become. So something had to happen. Something had to happen that changed the game. So usually it was either a script revelation, but those come later in the script, obviously, or some sort of tension or some sort of romantic set. It became, especially later in the film, more sexual. But you also had like the meet cute in the park, where they had that sort of the almost like the anime where the camera spins around them, where boy meets girl in the park. But those things had to happen simply because I knew I had limited opportunities now
You had to
to
break
open
it
up the
up. Yeah.
world, and then you had to write the music for each of those.
So back to talking about your circular way of talking. I'm going to
Sure,
pull this
sure.
all the way back to, did you have a similar experience of throwing something at the wall, seeing if it sticks? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to try it. This is part of the creative process. I wanted to get your feedback if that was part of how you did either editing, directing, writing, whatever. Was that part of your process?
No, it is when I work alone. So it is when I write music or it is when I, you know, write something. But the difference between like a book or fiction or short story, the difference between in filmmaking, and it's interesting and it requires an extra step, and I don't know that everybody has it. It is you write this, but instead of throwing it at the wall and seeing if it sticks, it now gets filtered through the interpretation of all of the different actors. It gets filtered through the interpretation of your direction of those specific actors through things like this was supposed to take place in an elevator, but now it's going to take place. And all of those things are happening so dynamically that you don't get the chance to go, huh, yeah, that's not working. Let's reimagine this a little bit. I love that when I'm writing. I have written a whole chapter and then read it and just realized, man, this sucks because this is not going to work. The writing might be fine, but it is not going to get us from point A to point C, because this B is just not it.
But
And
but what
yeah,
I've learned is you can't know that until you try it, right?
sure. And the hard part about this is that you burn too much time, too much whatever. Sometimes, and this is sort of the magic of filmmaking, is you end up with whatever you end up with. And then you sit down often months later in the editing room, and what you got is what you got. I mean, yes, if you're Marvel, you can go back and reshoot something that isn't working, but I'm not Marvel. And so there have been genuinely magical moments, I'm sure, and maybe it's like childbirth, I blocked them out. There are times where I just had to grit my teeth and live with it. And yeah, I know there were, but there have been genuinely magical things that if it had been the way it was in my mind, I think it would have been wrong. It wouldn't have worked. Or if the lighting, if the footage had not been a little off or shaky or something, and then I can't use that line read. And that is the thing. It's almost like, you're a parent. There's only so much you can control, and then at certain point, and I love that line from the original Roseanne series where she says you just do your best and you send them out into the world and you hope they don't come back snap defective, right? You just hope that it's not going to be unwatchable. And there is a process that you talked about, the same one about speeding up. It's a complementary process where it focuses the mind and allows you to edit a narrower group of things. The process of letting go. Does this matter this much? Or did I hire this actor for a reason? And while this may not be how I would have played it or even how I wrote it, because there's a real challenge if you're the writer or the director at the same time, right? Uh, but I'm going to trust that they wouldn't have played it that way if there was a truth to somebody there. And if so, it was my fault for casting them or working them too hard or whatever I was doing that they couldn't give their best performance. And there are characters, the David Eggers Tom as the second, his Tom is so passive, and that was only partly intentional. But he's a really good listener. He doesn't do I'm ADHD all day, every day. You know, if I can be having a conversation while listening to the song that's playing in the thing and remembering how that was on my third date with so and so at this time, and still be doing that and laughing at the joke that somebody at the table next door said in a restaurant. His presence became a defining characteristic. You know, Jordan Getty was much more serpentine than I had originally written him to be. He was also much younger, because I'd never got anybody to audition in the age range I made that character. I made that character in his 40s, and I got a bunch of people who are like Santa Claus age who were giving like very untoward vibes. Like I would not want like a 60-year-old Jordan, with like white hair, very much looking like
I
Santa Claus.
didn't
It was
I
a
didn't want
whole
a
other thing.
25-year-old
Yeah.
Jordan. I mean, he
Yeah.
was
It
terrifying
was,
character.
yes. And what was strange was they almost became, that changed what I wrote to be almost two people who were much closer in age. Now he played a little older. Jordan Getty has life experience and he plays a little older, but they almost became, if you watch Archer, like Barry and Archer, how they're like the blonde and brunette version of the of the two sides of a coin. And that made the reason I did so many rewrites is I would see what these kids would do, and then I would go home and I would think about it, and I couldn't sleep, and I'd get up at 4 and I rewrote the kitchen argument at 4 a.m. And at 6, I pushed back from the table, took a shower, went back and read it and said, "Who hurt you, Benjamin Bryant? What is wrong with you?" Because that is such a bitter, but I knew now what they could do. So it was a little bit different. And then the poor kids had to memorize it, in like 24 hours. But so it is a little bit different and yet the same. It's you throw it out there, but then you see how it filters through other people, and sometimes you change it, sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. But the process of needing to make it all work within the constraints forces you to trust your collaborators.
When you talk about constraints, for me, uh, the hardest constraint I've ever had to deal with is when you rent a music studio, because time is
Oh yeah,
literally money,
yeah,
and you were living that every day while you're shooting.
yeah,
Time is
yes.
money, and at some point you got to go. That's as good as we're going to get, and move on, and or give up. I mean, it's just there's your choices get much smaller when there's that dollar sign hanging there.
And that's the parallel. That's the parallel. It's because I think, and I happen to be kind of a flexible person. Maybe it's because I grew up in the military, moving every year 3 years. There was a lot about my life just growing up that I got very sick when I was in college. There was a lot that I just didn't get to choose in my life. So it has actually been very easy for me to sit there and go, well, I don't love this, but we're going to make it work. It'll be fine and move on. And what that's forced me to be is much more intentional the other way, which is what are the times when I am going to say no? And in fact, there was literally only one contentious shoot and I'm not going to get into the details, but there was only one contentious scene shot in that entire scene. And it was indeed we need to go back and we need to fix something. And it wasn't even ego. It was just exhaustion. The actor specifically involved I think did not want to revisit this, was not 100% sure why we were revisiting it. It didn't feel good to revisit it. I don't think they felt criticized, but it felt like it was being added on. And I think they weren't sure what the reasons were. The end product speaks for itself. And I think everybody now understands why we did that. But The only time there was contention was the one time I was like, I've watched this, I checked with other people. I don't think this is going to work the way we have it. Am I wrong? And they're like, nope, it doesn't work. It's seedy. And so we added, and so what we ended up with was we shot some more scenes that we intercut into a montage. And for those who are familiar, I'm not going to specific the specifics of the scene, but, it was the 4G, as we like to call it. That
Right.
scene didn't have enough. It didn't have the right balance. It's almost like when you're cooking, it needed to have the right balance of romance, shock value, because it was accomplishing a very strange thing, how this couple's marriage is strengthened by doing something that you might not think of intentionally. And then once I knew what we needed and we got it, it was a long day. It was a long process to get what we needed. We had it all and we were able to make it. And my favorite thing about that is that was a ridiculous shoot night, the original shoot for that thing. And it's a very, very tame set of footage. But if you watch it, the combination of your music and the editing technique allowed us to shoot something during COVID where nobody kisses in that scene.
Right.
Not one person kisses. We're actually not really close to each other. And almost everything we shot lasted 20 seconds in duration. And then we moved on to shooting something else.
And you
And
said you were like giggling nonstop while you were
oh, it was
shooting.
ridiculous. Oh, it's terrible. I mean, I'm not even mad about it because the one thing I'm now a certified intimacy coordinator. And so I do this, I interact with this on a regular basis. And the first thing I tell people is, and I became out of that film, hearing the horror stories and also looking back and being like, I mean, I played it best as I could and I'd like to think of a decent person, but even then I look back and be like, oh, now that I know, I would have done this differently. Um, but I honestly sought out that knowledge to know how to do it right. And then it turns out I'm actually really good at talking about these things and protecting people and also saying, okay, director, you have this vision. Okay, actor, you have these boundaries. How can we achieve the vision together? And so I've actually really enjoyed it. And we could do a whole other conversation one day about that. But,
But that
but
so intimate coordinators do not apply to the
yeah,
project I'm working on right now. That's for
no,
sure.
it's fascinating because I think you hear a lot of big stars saying things like, "Oh, they interrupt the process. I don't need someone to tell me where to put my hands." Well, that's choreography, and that's not even a required part of the job. That's something that usually is done we're taught to do choreography if between the director and the actor, because this is a mistake that I made. I got good advice, which was schedule your intimate scenes at the beginning of the shoot or at the end.
Hmm.
There's peril and there's progress in both, in the sense that people can either they don't know each other, so they have no preconceived notions, no beef, no exhaustion, and they're just doing it objectively at the beginning, or they're really comfortable with each other, hopefully, at the end. But if they don't like each other by the end, then you get, a Nick Nolte, Julia Roberts situation, and it's off to the races. And so I scheduled my most self-destructive, shall we say, intimate scene, the characters, that one was shot the first night when they met each other an hour before. And I scheduled my most romantic scene the last day. And this is another shout out to you. The way you helped me in making those scenes Black Mirror versions of each other is one
Yeah,
of
we talked about that.
my favorite artistic accomplishments. And the way because not only did each major character have a theme, so to speak, but each couple sort of had a theme. And so there's this toxic friendship slash situationship that's happening with Tom and Jordan. And so when they meet, there's a dance song playing in the club. And then those notes continue on in the score every time they have a significant scene together. And then you have this, is it atonal? Is that the right word?
Hmm.
Minor key, whatever the right musical genius that you apply to that version, where it almost becomes discordant and unpleasant. Those exact same songs that you were bopping to earlier and feeling the emotional connection when they're relating to each other emotionally suddenly become, when they're doing this thing that's going to not only blow up their relationship and their own lives, but it's the same song because it's the same people and it's the same relationship. It's just another level or layer of it.
So, perfect transition. This is what I wanted to talk about next, which was to back up for everybody. We made a decision very early on to write the closing credits song
Yeah.
first for this reason, so we could use it as a theme throughout the movie. So we
No, my
hinted
favorite
at this.
trick. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then believe it was your idea. Wait, I have this club scene early on, and I
Yes.
don't want to license music, so let's write some pop songs.
Right.
And
And they were
so,
originally just supposed to be some throwaway club songs,
right, but
but
then it
that's your
became a theme
genius.
I could
Yeah.
reuse. So I had these three themes that, yeah, I could interplay and then add new stuff too. Um, and here's the question I want to ask you, which is the way I write songs is I
Hmm.
write the lyrics first and then set it to music. And part of that is when I write music, I have to know what the music is about. And invariably, the lyrics are going to be changed. They're going to be reordered or beats added and subtracted, moved to fit and stuff. But I remember you were a bit surprised that I worked that way. And we went back and forth sharing lyrics. We wrote these poems that became,
Hmm.
but I wanted to capture your reaction to, wait, you want to just write a poem instead of a song? I remember that you were surprised by
This is a great question because now I have written many songs.
that.
Prior to that, I had not, and I had not experienced that process. I'd written many poems, and I did this thing that used to annoy back when in our church choir days, that used to annoy a mutual friend we had. I would write harmonies.
Hmm.
So I would write harmonies for, we were Catholic, and I still am, and there are a lot of, especially back then, there was a kind of a classic modern Catholic songbook, Be Not Afraid and these things like this. And I had this
Glory
choir
and
and I had these
praise.
people. Yes, glory and praise, exactly. And so in the glory and praise book, there were these things that we'd heard a million times, and I had all these singers, and I had people like our mutual friend who had a really lovely voice, and he was a man, and so you don't always have a lot of male voices. And so I would write things and he would be like, but that's not right. And that's not how you do it. And that's not like, you shouldn't do this. And I would be like, but it sounds really nice. So we're going to do it, and it used to really bother him, which, I just remember this very well because we were also roommates at the time. And, but that was always me. I was like, does it just sound good? you know, like, because I don't know anything about music or music theory or whatever, but I'm really good at pattern matching in my life. I'm really good at pattern matching in my life. And so I would take it to you or Bob Wurzelbach or any of the other people, and you would be like, okay, yeah, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. I don't know why it was. I couldn't explain. And so the thing is, he wasn't criticizing me because it sounded bad. He wasn't even criticizing. He was just very uncomfortable because you just made it up. Like, you don't have a reason for this. Well, if you don't have a reason, it must not, like, it's suspect, you know? And I know a lot of people think that way. And so I think that I internalized some of that, actually. I think I internalized that, you've got to, and what you taught me is there are a lot of ways to get to the reason. And so now it's funny because I still can't read or write music notation. Um, I will tend to write lyrics, and then I will hum or I will do whatever, or I'll play with them. And while I'm probably not nearly as intentional as you are because I don't have any relationship with the notes, um, it's probably the same thing that you've taught me without, because I'm just so by instinct in my feel. You've taught me this. So I was absolutely surprised because I was thought, don't you write? And then I also would see things like, I remember Jennifer Lopez, it was a thing where they were behind how a song, and she would be like, I really had this thing where I was like, da na 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 na, da 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 na na na, and then I was like, ooh, should have never loved you, and I was like, oh, that's how you write a song, because everyone kept telling me that the thing that I was doing, going on instinct or feel, isn't how you write a song. So I thought there was a way you write a song, and then I saw one or two people say I come up with like a hook, and then I find words that go with them, and now I have a hook, and then I build out a song. And since I'm not studying music, that becomes the only way I know how to do it. And I thank you because what you opened me up to was I'm a wordsmith. I'm a professional writer. I'm a professional speechwriter. I've written many poems, and the reason I can write songs today is because someone said you don't have to do it any one way. You were the first person, because a lot of people, I'm not sure if I'm using this term correctly because it's more of a young person term, but they gatekeep their professions, and so there are a lot of people, the musicians I've known are like, okay, if you don't understand music theory or whatever, then you shouldn't try. You couldn't play at this. And my proudest moment to come from the lessons you taught me about this was, and this was more of a beat than it was. I've been writing a musical, and I dropped a pill. I dropped a pill about a year ago. I texted you after this, and the pill fell, and I can't remember now, but it's like I don't know if you could hear it, but there was like the way it fell, and before it slowed down, and it bounced on the ground, slowed down, and
Right.
I could not get that out of my head. And I was like, okay. And so I recorded it really quickly, like I used to do with you. And then I wrote and said, "Oh, am I a musician now?" Because that sounds like one of those great songs, like this pill dropped on the ground and it bounced and it gave me the beat that became this number one platinum record. And you said yes, and you're thinking like it. But so I don't know that it was, to answer your question in a really roundabout way. I don't know that it was shock or surprise that you did it that way. It was shock or surprise that there wasn't one way to do it, because I was so intimidated by people who actually knew music. And people who knew music had told me, you can't just listen to something and say, that sounds really nice. I think I'm going to play with that. Or because what was I doing then with harmonies? I had words already. I had
Right,
music
right.
already. And my brain was saying, you know what else would really take that to create this feeling is adding this music to that. And so no shade at all to that mutual friend of ours. It was just that they also were young and also knew music a certain way. And so I think what you introduced me to the idea was each artist is allowed to have their process. And you didn't even say what you said now, which is so brilliant. I'm almost glad you didn't, because I had to discover it on my own, which is I like to know what the music is about.
Um, and I think it's also for me. I mean, I agree. There's no one way to do anything in a creative world, and I break this rule and have started with music before. Of course, I have, but I think the real reason I do it is a limitation that my brain compartmentalizes, and when I'm thinking music, I'm not thinking in terms of words. I'm not thinking uh, what's the best rhyme, what's the best way to handle this. And when I'm just focused on the words, and I got a rhyming dictionary and a thesaurus, and I'm really digging in, I feel like I'm getting a better quality of lyric than if I am just faking because my brain isn't engaged in that process. So to me, it's more of a limitation that I'm overcoming.
Well, I have a question for you, because the hardest part for me, I do something that you probably don't now, is I do figure out my structure before I write my poem. And the reason is that I have now tried to do what the brilliant Francis McGrath does, and I write a beautiful poem, and there's now no way to make it rhyme, or no way to put it into verses. So I now at least say, at least at this stage in my baby songwriting, because I'm only 6 years into it, is what what am I going for? And then I'll do some research. I'll find songs that have that same kind of feel, or same kind of like, okay, I wrote several songs for using the same lyrics for And Then There Were None when I directed that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted like a 60s pop version of it. And then I wanted and then that, like, almost like someone had recorded a traditional song in the 1960s in a big band version. And I was surrounded by a lot of talented people who could help me create this. Uh, but my issue was, shoot, I have a poem, but it doesn't work. It's just a children's rhyme. It doesn't work. And I was so paralyzed by that now I will sit there and go, okay, if I want something that's sort of what makes Motown songs so great, because I don't have that feel that you do, that natural feel you do for music, for the music writing. I'll sit there and go, okay. And someone will say, oh, it tends to be like, the term that I learned that I absolutely love is four on the floor for pop songs. And they'll say,
Yeah.
like, this uses four on the floor. And then once I understand that concept, then I can be like, okay, well, whatever I need to write needs to fit into this, and then I can break it. But I need to at least write something, because I end up with something so free flowing and so wonderful, because I was never good at rhyming poetry. I was always good at prose. And then I can't get it into anything singable, because it becomes what is it, the litany of the saints. Whatever, it becomes this long, like a dirge, or like, something where we're just saying words over and over again. And so for me, I need that structure. And that's where I'm a little jealous of your natural ability to just feel and connect with music.
what what I know enough about when I'm writing poetry is I come up with the structure as I'm writing. And so a stanza starts to form. I'm just throwing things and reacting, and a stanza forms, and it's like, oh, this stanza is 5 lines and longer, shorter, whatever. And then I'm able to duplicate that. And knowing that I have a few stanzas of the same structure, I know that they most likely will musically be similar. Um,
Well, let me
and if
ask
you're
you a
capturing
question then.
the rhythm,
Okay.
if you have the same rhythm structure also, then it makes it a lot easier.
Let me ask you a question. What was it like for you? Because I'm assuming, I know you've collaborated before,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm assuming you've collaborated with people who have an interest or experience, fellow musicians or songwriters, right? So this was the first time you collaborated with someone that but who had no experience writing songs before. And so what was that like?
Um,
Because we really did write. I mean, Changing Stations is mostly you. I did come up with more of the music for Sexy Nightmare, but then, and I think it was a little bit more. By the third one, we had pushed pull and it was a little more collaborative. But I do remember sending you some notes and you just being like, nah. But I trusted you at that point on Closer to You. But, each of those songs was a different sort of level of contribution. And I don't recall it being it might have been frustrating for you at times, but I don't recall it being tense because I remember very much trusting you if you said something wasn't working. And I remember you very much trusting me if saying, like, I remember, and sometimes we would come to it together when we were like, that sounds too much like reduce, reuse, recycle. Do you
right.
remember? But it was
Yeah.
wonderful to get us to what we wanted to accomplish there. But then we were like, oh man, we're going to have to find new words for that.
So I don't know if this answers your question, but what I remember most from the experience is when I look back, I don't know what was my idea and what was your idea on almost any of it. I mean, musically, most of the ideas are made. Sexy
Yeah, yeah,
Nightmare,
yeah,
musically, you contributed some ideas to
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But lyrically, I couldn't say, oh, that was my line, oh, that was your line, because it became a process. And I was part of the whole, is the way I think of it. And I think you've
I
told me
would say
before,
that's
you
true for
can
me.
remember.
Yeah. I have a really, as you may recall, as you know, just in life, I have a very insanely detailed memory. But the things I remember the most is there are certain things that I just never would have thought, or I specifically was like, I don't think this is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
This is too out of the box. But this is what I talk about. I'm a big fan of letting artists that are good at their jobs be artists that are good at the job and not micromanaging. So there are things that when we get to those lines, I specifically remember saying, until I heard the finished product, and maybe not until after I'd heard the song a few times, did I understand the entire bridge of Closer to You. Even when I was in the recording studio singing it, I was like, what the hell is coming out of my mouth? I have to trust this man. I have to trust this man. He knows what I'm doing. And Taryn and I later, Taryn Hacker, lovely singer who I worked with, we later were working on the Vietnam concert on the mall. And her husband was one of the MCs and I was the executive producer. And we were both talking about we just had to trust that process because you had us saying such random things, succulent sensation, tantalizing, all of these things that you in your head knew were going to work once they were together and we could not imagine it. And that's my lesson. The rest of the stuff, yes, like changing stations and the verses. I remember you sent me something, then I sent something, and then we sent something, and I have no idea where it starts to get uh driving the edge of the map. That's something that never would have come out of my brain and worked so well and sounded so freaking fantastic coming out of John Hacker's mouth. And I know, so it's all credit due that I never would have thought of the words driving the edge of the moon. And then
And see,
your other one,
I
yeah.
don't know that I could take credit for it. So I don't
Well,
know which one was mine.
you had something I'd submitted and you were like, well, the most obvious example of that, one that was less creative, but was more obvious is I had said something like boys and girls. and you changed it to he and she because you were like, boys and girls, I just don't like it. It's very cliche. You just hear it all the time. I think we can do better. And so let's just change it to he and she. And at the time, I had no thoughts on that whatsoever. I was like, oh, okay, cool. But whenever I listen to it, I think you sort of sit up because it's not the thing your brain was expecting to hear, but yet you fully understood what it meant. But now your brain has somehow engaged more in the song and I remember so there's things like that where I know that I didn't come up with that because I learned a lesson. Driving the Edge of the Map, I don't remember what I had, but you were like, let's make it. And it was almost always something like that. You as an experienced, lyricist and someone who lived in this world longer and who also just has you have your own perspective as a performer. That was where you taught me. And I am proud of myself to say that, I was also so busy that if I was like, okay, you got this. I want to give myself credit, but I also want to acknowledge that part of it was not, I'm not going to create more stress. If someone who's an expert in this is saying, why don't we try this 90% of the time? And I also wanted it to count those times I would say to you, no, I don't care for that. Or I really don't
Right.
like that. I also remember we had one misunderstanding and I giggle every time. You named and still name the opening track of the score for the opening credits, Strippin'.
Stripping.
And I kept trying to think, how am I going to engage with him on this? Because I don't want this movie is not about, to this day, people are like, it's the naked movie. It's the movie with the penis in it. And I'm like, turn on any prestige show today. They like, maybe I started it, but you know what? It's not that unusual, but that's just Americans, right? And I was like, I don't want them thinking this is a show about strippers. And I get why Francis is thinking this and, da, 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 da. And I remember trying to have this conversation about like, I really don't care for it stripping. And you're like, well, he's driving down the Las Vegas Strip. And I was like, God darn it, that's brilliant. Like I did not understand. I kept thinking stripping like taking your clothes off, and I didn't want to define the movie and open the movie with that image. And then when you said, well, he's going down the Las Vegas Strip, and I just thought, and I was like, oh, it's a pun, it's smart, it's unconventional. I am into this. Sold.
I am a award-winning punster. I got my trophies up there. So
It is a tremendous skill. And I want to reemphasize what I was saying earlier because that is truly the brilliance of it. And if people want to learn from these exchanges and not just be entertained by the extreme verbosity of your friend Benjamin Bryant, um, there's occasionally a nugget of wisdom. And the nugget of wisdom is that if you say something, and this is true in my speech writing work as well, if you say something that is too obscure or too lofty, you may risk communicating what you want to communicate. People may not get
Mhm.
it in the time that you're giving them to get it because you're now on to the next verse or the next lyric or the next part of the speech or whatever. But if you say something that their brain gets what you mean, but isn't the way they've always heard it, their brain has to engage with it in a new
Yeah.
way. And that's why that we have lots of examples, all the ones we're talking about. But the boys and girls to he and she, the actual line is boys and girls out looking for Mr. Right, I think, or something like that. All the
Hmm.
people in the world tonight, boys and girls out looking for Mr. Right. Yeah. And and you changed it immediately. You were like, I just don't like boys and girls. And you said, how about he and she? And I'm like, fine. Like, sure. But I've come to understand very quickly, actually, the brilliance in that because at no point are you distracted where you have to stop listening to the song to go, what does he mean by he and she? You fully
Right.
understood it and you can continue on. So it never took you out of the song and you never stopped listening to the song. But your brain engaged on that because it wasn't the same thing you hear all the time. So it never caused you to drift away from the song either. Too many cliches, it just becomes background music. It's elevator music, you know?
I shared that the lyrics. I'm going to do a video on this. I share all my lyrics with a friend of mine, Frank, and he was reviewing that song, and he was like, "He and she looking for Mr. Right. Did you mean to write this?" And it's like, "Yeah, yeah." And he's
Yes.
like, "Oh," and he had to think
There
about
was
it.
there was
It's
a
like,
discussion.
yeah,
It was not only what I meant to write, it was something I posited and fought for. And yes, you were correct to do that because it was such a valuable lesson. And now I get, all the pieces come together. Punditry. which is in and itself a pun, in and of itself a pun, um, is actually quite a skill there. Because as long as you don't become too in love with your own work, finding ways to say things that everyone understands what you mean but aren't quite the same is a way to bring people deeper in and to connect with and also to make sure people love a product that they know they only could have gotten from you, that they're not going to get
Oh,
anywhere else. You know what I mean? They're not necessarily thinking I
that's
can
a
only
good
get
way
it
to
from
look at
Francis
things.
McGrath, but but they know they're not getting a print. They know they're getting the original piece of artwork. They may or may not associate it with Francis McGrath, but they know they're getting something that was intentional. That's not off a factory.
So puns is a great tool, and I wanted to talk about another one you already alluded to. And I think we both learned so much about alliteration.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, so the line we had was, it sounded like reduce, reuse,
I don't even
recycle.
remember. I think it may have had reuse in it because that was the whole point is that he was going to rebuild, reuse, re something. It didn't disappear early, but it disappeared early enough that I don't remember it well. Um,
Well, but
but it
I
definitely
do
sounded
think it
like
was you that came up with the idea of using erase.
yes.
And okay, so there's one I do remember, but it was so profound because when we think of alliteration, we never think it doesn't have to be the first syllable.
The first syllable. Yeah. That was my
It's the
speech writing
stressed.
coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, so we
That
came
was the
up
speech
with
writing. Yeah.
review, erase, rewrite.
Rewrites.
And
I remember you actually being excited about that at the moment. Like it was, and I didn't think it was super profound, but I think it also speaks to collaboration because people have different, we both deal with words, but you deal with words in one way and
I'm
I deal
still
with words in
excited
different,
about
I
it.
have to
I
get
just got
generals. Yeah.
goosebumps.
Well, I have to get, you can imagine how many speeches. So for those of you who don't know, I've spent a lot of time writing speeches and ghostwriting articles, things for politicians and senior leaders and general officers and, CEOs. And that's part of my day job career. And, everyone's heard a speech. Everyone, it frustrates me so much when somebody gets up. I don't do a lot of politics, but it frustrates me so much. But I hear a lot of political speeches and they give a stump speech and you've heard it so many times, not because they've given that speech, but because that same speech has been given in that same cadence a million times. And when you can find ways, so I guess we've both been working to the same thing this whole time and I just didn't realize it. Because you absolutely could have come up with erase, but maybe not with the same process. And I absolutely could have come up, maybe not with he and she, but something like that. But maybe that's just we're finding a commonality here that when you can introduce something that feels familiar and effective, but if you listen to like Martin Luther King or Barack Obama or even Ronald Reagan, Peggy Noonan's speeches, touch the surly face of God, and all these things like this, a shining city on a hill. People would say, no, you need to be like a siding city on a hill because that's how they were taught alliteration needs to work. But there's something magical when it feels, when your brain knows what's happening, so it doesn't have to stop and go, wait, what did they just say? But it also feels just a little different. Just a little different. It feels fresh. It feels original. It feels like they're talking to you. And so I think that it's something I've always liked. Your use of sounds was another lesson. And being
Mhm.
inspired and having the lyrics and the music informed by sounds in nature or sounds that we hear in our everyday worlds. And I definitely thought about that. If you listen to, so for those who don't know, as I mentioned, changing stations, you came up with that melody entirely. And you sent it to me. And I remember the demo and I remember being like, oh my God, I can't believe this poem that we worked on is now a song because that you never have that first time you have a song ever is probably you were 10. For me, I was in my 30s or something, 40s. And Sexy Nightmare, I was making tacos and I stopped, turned the heat down, and I had that dun 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 dun. Both of us can probably find the sound file of me going dun 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 dun. It was like Aphrodite. And then you helped me refine it and find the thing. And then you created that amazing bridge from the inspiration. I said, I want this Vanity Six Janet Jackson if thing. And you more than exceeded my expectations with that. and we had a song. And but sometimes, like Closer to You was much harder, in my recollection, because we were trying to evoke a time period. And I think we had a much, and also we were filling that last spot, you know, it
Yeah,
was
we
not
decided to
as
go
organic
kind
as
of
we
a
had anticipated.
90s Madonna feel,
Madonna, yep,
the
yep,
Vogue kind of.
with the little house kind of thing. And I think that speaks to sort of the parallel of what you're talking about. A, we were tired. We'd already done two. We were heavy into the score at that point, but we didn't have that. And Closer to You ended up being this magical, incredible part of the score. And I would be curious, maybe you know the answer to this. Do you know if they wrote My Heart Will Go On after the score was written, or if the score was informed by My Heart Will Go On?
I do not know that. And
Yeah,
the
that's
example I
where
use,
they developed together.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of Return of the King with Into the
Mm-hmm.
West, where we
Mm-hmm.
have that scene where Gandalf is talking and we hear that song introduced in the middle of a battle, So, and then you get
It's
that
really
beautiful song.
amazing to me how Closer to You, Sexy Nightmare, and Changing Stations then so deeply informed those characters in the score.
It
I
made
almost
everything
wish we could have made a
easier.
song for the 4G, but what I've been told is that people listen to that. I would never think to listen to that as a single, but people listen to the 4G song. But you are much more in tune with sort of what is that? Is that what is that? Is that called ambient music? What is that?
Yeah, yeah, I would call it ambient. Yeah.
Now, the fun
Uh,
note about that is that the the gasps and the moans are not the actors, they're mine. So I don't
right.
listen to that. I don't listen to that often. That was me acting, but he just wasn't connecting with it outside of the scene. So we had set up the booth, and we were doing some reshoots and some other things, uh, of some insert work. And I was like, hey, can you just record real quick some moans and gasps and whatever? And it just wasn't happening. And so,
Um,
and then you
okay,
said
first
you
off,
didn't want to do it.
you sent me a file of stuff you
Uh,
had from somewhere else, and it
yeah,
was
just
horrific. And
it was like stock stuff. Yeah.
yeah, and it was really porny and yeah, hard to use.
Well, tell
But
me
you
about
came
that,
up
because yeah, I'd love to
you
actually
came up with the
spend
name of
some
the
time.
song. I had to look it up. I couldn't think of it. Our Own Rules.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
expanded it because it's only like 30 seconds in the movie, but I expanded it to like 4 minutes for the album version. Um,
Something is shorter. Something is shorter in the something is shorter on the soundtrack to accommodate that being longer, and that is longer. And I always tell people to listen to that because it's a whole meal on the soundtrack. Our Own Rules is. But I would actually love to know. So that it's very simple. We're these two middle-aged men, who we suddenly have to create. Like, to me, there's the challenge of writing a score and there's the challenge of writing a song. Was that not, to me, that felt like a very unique challenge, and I really just had to trust you. And in fact, the hardest thing for me was when I realized I was going to have to do the moans and the thing myself, was to create a character, because I'm actually in that scene, as you know, and that's not my character in that scene. And it's not really, so what I started to say was, let's just get the mood of the song. Like, let's divorce it. So that was the only time I said, I'm divorcing this entirely from, and I'm just going to create. And I was inspired because Cheyenne we'd flown her up here to do these insert scenes that we did do one reshoot, and it was that, the opening scene. Uh, in fact, you originally scored a scene that was completely different, shot in Vegas, and then
right.
the very opening scene, and and she she nailed, you know, I hope, like, I hope she doesn't take that the wrong way, but she nailed on the first track the breathing and the hesitation and everything. So it's funny, she's not in that scene either. And
Right.
that's actually the actress from his first girlfriend in the first scene. And I'm in the scene, but I'm portraying more the feelings. And we just went with like the vibes of that. But how do you even begin to think of a song? How do you even conceptualize something like
Um, Man, that was 6 years ago, wasn't it?
Yes. Did you, but I mean, like, if someone says, I need
I
something to go, that was
I
so
think that
organically
one
woven
started
in.
with the drum part. I think I needed to have a percussion groove to it that I could build on top of it. And that's the way I made the final album version, is that it builds and builds and adds more and more instruments, which is, the way I generally make music, is because I can't record everything at the same time, right? So it just added. The real secret of that song was, when it came to these moans and sound effects, the real magic is less is more. There's really very few moans and breaths in there, just a handful, and they're spaced apart in the way they fall. But the key, if we had just used a ton of them, it would have just sounded awful, I think. So I think the
Well,
magic
I
was
certainly couldn't listen
heat.
to it.
You were
I
asking
want you to
about you were
go
asking
ahead.
about Closer to You being
Hmm.
harder, and I remember being really frustrated writing the music to that until I came to the revelation to have the two voices sing over each other. Closer to you, close. Once I figured out, oh, they're going to sing over top of each other, um, that I was like, I think this is the secret sauce to make the song work. I remember being nervous. I was like, I hope he likes this because I really think this is the way to go.
Hmm.
I wasn't 100% sure, but I was thinking, I think this is the magic we
I have
need.
to say, it was the one I won't say doubts because at that point I had stopped doubting anything. Like I didn't really doubt you to begin with, but I stopped even questioning. That's a better word, questioning. I will say that it was the one that I had the least understanding of what it was going to sound like. But I'm so happy. The only thing I wish is that and this is the peril when you're doing everything, at that point, recording it was an afterthought. And I wish that I'd had more time. Like I like it so much that I wish that I'd had more time to actually prep for recording it. I wish that I had brought more to it.
You
Um,
did not need more. You sang beautifully on that. I don't think
it
you
just,
could have done it any better.
yeah. Okay. Well,
It
thank
worked.
you. And also you
Hey,
had the challenge of working with my deep voice, which I respect.
okay.
That's like well, no, I mean, I've only come to understand now, having done musical theater and things like this, how much, like low baritones and basses can restrict the tricks you can do. You much more
and
want to have you want a John Hacker who can do those runs and the squeals and the screams and all the things.
it is very frustrating for me to have such a deep voice. There's just so many songs I can't sing. I can't get up there. Maybe I can tune them down, make it work and stuff. But that's why on this project I'm going to have a lot of other singers in there. Let other people come in and sing these parts I can't sing. Hey, we could do this all day, but I want to
So
go
okay.
out and tie a full circle here. You
Mhm.
kept talking about how sunny and bright Vegas was. And one of my favorite lines in Station to Station is, cracks are revealed when lit by the sun. And I think that captures, a lot of what we were talking about throughout this whole conversation.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. And that was actually one that I can tell you for sure was we contributed to in different ways. That line started off one way and then it came in, but it didn't change dramatically. Like you had a very in your poem was something very, and I think we changed one or two words, and it is that's if anybody listening to this, like buttoning this up, I would recommend starting with that song, especially if you're interested in the lyric part of it, because the poem you wrote and the small changes and refinements we made in our test process, our very first time writing together,
Yeah.
it you could break that poem down, like an old class where you analyze the lyrics of something. And I think you could find a lot of magical things. I think a class would find a bunch of different stuff and it would mean something different to each of them. And again, it started not with a pun, but the whole, well, sure, yeah, with the changing stations concept of it was called Station to Station. We didn't want to steal Bowie's title. And I love the idea of changing stations at a point when someone's about to make a big change in their life. And then you worked in some of the broadcast vibe to it.
But I also think the song works differently after you see the movie because
Oh,
there's
for
so
sure.
much. I mean, there's enough that you can relate to, but when you think about it from Tom's point of view,
Oh
wow,
yeah.
these lyrics are very specific to him as well.
Oh yeah.
So that was one
He's
of the fun parts.
so thank you. It was, we should do this again. We should continue to revisit. It's the fifth anniversary of the film this fall. So maybe
Yeah,
there is another opportunity to have more conversations about this. Because it does have a cult status, which is nice. I get my pennies every month from Amazon. They
I
pay
get
something like
mine from CD Babies who sends me my
they,
pennies.
I won't actually say how little we make because they might get mad at us, but we make very little. But we make very little per massive numbers of stream or time watched or listened to it. And so that little means so much because a few cents means somebody sat with our content or somebody's people watched or listened to our content for an extended period of time. And that means a lot. So I just want to thank you for that process. I want to thank you for teaching me to not be afraid of my own creativity. I wish that I could write and play all the instruments like you do. I do have to rely on, you know, cakewalk and other things like that and orchestration. I use an ethically sourced product that develops orchestration for me to help ideate, not to release anything. I also found I can find ethically sourced voices, which is nice too. People who get paid when their voices are
Right.
used. And that means a lot to me as a singer and as a performer myself, that people get paid for their work and they're not just created by computers. But I don't have your skills and talents, but you taught me that I didn't have to be able to live in a creative world and to create. I just had to start and I just had to put something down. So thank you.
What you taught me to trust my instincts and go with them and see where they lead, and that has saved me so much time and made me so much more productive. So that's the main thing I wanted to thank you for. And then again, alliteration. The new album is full of alliteration because of what we did. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Is like I love this now. This is a tool that I want to reuse. I'll throw it in with my puns and my rhymes.
Yeah, no, it's a great tool in the toolbox. So let's definitely do this again. But
Yeah. I
this mutual admiration society is should definitely be something we keep going. It's good for my ego.